The Troubadour. Let's see. Talked about how its gameplay loop's going to be a bit longer and have a more sustained presence in normal Mesmer. And then Chronomancer was kind of the de facto support. We're going to be kind of shifting where some things live onto the Troubadour. We'll get into that a bit more later, so that Chronomancer can kind of regain its old identity, and Troubadour can kind of step in. So a lot of the ways it supports allies are more intentional and can hopefully lead to better gameplay. But then the first thing, we can zoom in. I think, looking at the UI is the first thing you'll notice. Talked about notes. They're going to fill up at the bottom bar there. Again, there are no clones. Some of the reasons, we had multiple reasons for doing this. The first one was just that we wanted kind of people to focus more on keeping their instruments up in that gameplay loop, interacting with Crescendo, rather than having to worry about their clones being killed. And managing them, stuff like that. Also, in some game modes like World v World, when it gets larger scale, we want support Mesmer to definitely function, and we saw that when you're playing a Chronomancer that has clones, a lot of the time you can't depend on getting a high shatter count. So we want to make sure that this spec feels good to play and you're not fighting your mechanic, and it just does what you want. But going from the notes, like I said, they fuel the instruments. It's going to be a bit different from normal shatters. Normal shatters, they basically scale however many clones you have. Like if you do a mind rack with all 3 clones, it's going to do a lot more damage than 1. Instruments are going to be a bit different. When you play an instrument, it's going to be an initial effect, and this initial effect is constant. It's going to be the same whether you have 0 notes or 3 notes. And what's going to be different is that when you use it, the instrument will kind of float in the background, giving those bonuses like I talked about, and the duration in which it does that is scaling based on the notes. So you want to build up notes so that your loot is there for longer. And basically more notes will have better bonuses so that you have bigger windows to do things like strike the Crescendo or use some of the utilities that we'll get into.
Yeah, so notably, it still counts to 3. They're just in groups of 2 notes. So you get 3, still have a total of 3 here.
Right.
But there are 6 things that are filled.
I believe the notes are actually on a scale and do play a little tune. If those who are musically inclined want to look into that, then that would be pretty cool. But
okay.
The note, it's three notes, like 3 clones. We wanted that kind of be similar to normal Mesmer.
All right. Should we hop into some skills?
Yes, we can look at the skills.
I'm just gonna start pressing buttons. Let's press the first one.
About
what's
loot.
Going on here?
First one, you're going to whip out the loot and do 3 waves. All the instruments are kind of replacements, like normal shatters. So this one's going to be the mind rack. It's going to be the more damaging one. When you do it, if you have no target, these waves will just go out in front of you. But you can use a target; it'll kind of lock onto them. So this is just your damaging skill, your mind rack equivalent. That you can see here that there are some baseline bonuses for that loot. We'll get into more. A lot of them are going to come from traits. So pretty simple skill. It's going to be the one you're pressing often. And then we can move on to the flute.
Notably, I am going to be doing a lot of cheating on this stream, so no cooldowns are active, but you can see on skill facts and tooltips that there are real cooldowns on these skills. But yeah, tell me about the flute.
The flute, that's going to be kind of your cry of frustration equivalent. You're going to fluster your enemies with a note from your flute. It's going to do a wave in front of you, confusing people. And it's also going to have a sweet spot in the middle where it's like, middle of the hitbox. If you hit them, you're also going to get a short daze kind of interrupt. We wanted to give the skill a bit more utility. A lot of the time, the cry of frustration equivalents aren't useful in a lot of the builds. So I wanted to give it something a little extra that, even supports want to use it, even, power DPS wants to use it. So it should be a pretty good skill. And then we can move on to the drum, the deafening drum. This is going to be your diversion, the CC skill. You're going to slam the drum, do a wave out, and the wave will have kind of scaling effects based on how close the enemy was from you. So you want to be pretty close when you land this for the strongest effect. At the close range, you're going to stun them. Then a bit farther out, it's going to lessen into a daze. And at the last range, that daze is going to taper off into just a lesser duration. So this is kind of, again, the CC skill you're going to get value out of this kit that, all Mesmers have, and then we can move on to the harp. So the harp is going to be, the harmonious harp is going to be your healing skill. The first thing you can notice is that it does not just give distortion baseline. I think Cal has...
I have some traits on.
Cal has a trait on, we'll get to that, but this skill baseline doesn't provide distortion. We wanted this spec to, instead of having a high cooldown invuln like a lot of Mesmer specs have, we wanted to do it lower cooldown, more sustain that you see from a lot of supports. So it's going to, when you use it, do a burst healing, and then over time just do some more pulse healing. This is going to, again, low cooldown, healing your allies, what you want to do on more traditional healing support. And so
There's
all
one
of
more
those
skill
skills.
here.
Yes.
Or are you going to say
You will
something else?
notice.
You going to say something else?
No. You will notice that these all are the instruments, and then the fifth skill, the F5, is a bit different. This is the crescendo that we've been talking about. So when you use the crescendo, you're going to kind of have a warm-up where you're going to conduct all your instruments to kind of strike a chord at once and release a wave of energy. It's going to deal damage to enemies and also grant your allies barrier. And the effect of this will scale based on how many instruments you have. So it's going to get, right now, 25% better for all of the effects based on how many instruments. So if you have all 4 instruments up, it can potentially get double the effect of this. And it's going to get additional effects based on traits. You can see that it's going to also give Might and Fury based on a trait per instrument you have up. And, ends up being a pretty flexible skill. That's kind of like your bigger payoff. But yeah, that kind of comprises the core of the profession loop. Again, building up the notes, using your instruments. I think you can probably aim to have 2 or 3 instruments up with like a correct rotation. 4 if you're really going for it, to get some powerful tide swinging effects out of these skills.
Maybe I just mash all my buttons with 0 notes so that I can crescendo. Yeah. Probably not ideal, but it is an option available to you.
Yeah, you can, use all your instruments at once to get that strong value immediately, but then you do lose out on having those instruments be up for the longer period of time. As we're going to see from the traits, there are bonuses that just come with these instruments being behind you. So we can go into the utilities next before we go into the traits. So the utility type for this elite spec will be tails. They're going to be kind of vocal things, just like shouts, where you're going to like say a message when you use them. And these tales are all based on the Legends of Tyria. They're specifically focused more on like lore and heroes you've known from Guild Wars 2, rather than like, Revenant has like Guild Wars 1 things. But this game, it's been around for a long time. So we're going to talk about the heroes that you all know and have played with as your adventures through the game. So as I said, they're kind of like vocal skills, just like shouts. When you use them, there's going to be an additional effect. So you can hover over the tail of the Soul Keeper. This one's based around the Almora Soul Keeper. It's going to grant offensive boons to your allies. And then you can see each of them have a performance bonus, which is kind of the little hook. And basically, all the utility skills correspond to an instrument, and they get stronger while that instrument is playing. So Almora is corresponding to the lute, so if you use it while the lute is playing, you'll grant some extra notes to yourself, so you can get some other instruments playing. And then we can go into the other ones. Next we have the Honorable Rogue, which is going to be Dougal Keen, the protagonist from the well-known, amazing Ghosts of Ascalon book. That I'm sure everyone is aware of. He's a super cool character. But this one, he is a thief, a rogue. His daring adventure is going to make everyone faster, remove conditions, and also grant endurance. And he corresponds to the drum, so if that's playing, you can also give some super speed to your allies. And then the last one, or not the last one, the next supportive one is going to be the Tale of the Valiant Marshal.
Hopefully people recognize this character.
Your defensive shout based on Traherne, another amazing character. It's going to give your allies protection, resistance, break, stun, pretty powerful defensive effects. And if you have the harp playing as well, it's also going to give your allies barrier. And then the last skill is actually going to be an offensive ability. It's going to be the Tale of the Tortured Mastermind, who is another person that, we talked about this in the blog, Scarlet Briar. This is going to be a more targeted shout. You're going to almost mock your enemies viciously, one might say. Kind of targeting on them, summoning those laughing clockwork knightheads on your enemy. And it's going to pulse 4 times. The first pulse will leave them weakened, then you'll leave them vulnerable, then it will strip boons, and then the last one will daze them. And it corresponds to the flute, so when you have that active, it's going to apply additional torment per pulse, and also do some extra defiance damage for, PvE situations. Something about I'm hoping you're hearing them as Cal's playing, but when you play these tales, like I said, they have spoken lines. Each of them have about 4 that'll play in order. So as you fight with them and use them, it'll you'll hear a poem that your character will say, and I'm sure it'll be on the wiki that everyone correlates. But pretty cool narrative work from the team, and nice little stories you get to hear about these characters that you've played through in the game. We can also go to the heal, Aurene, we showed that one off. It's going to be a chunky heal for you and your allies when you use it, and its performance bonus, it's going to, instead of corresponding to a specific instrument, it's just going to care about how many instruments you have up. And so when you use it, if you have 2 or more instruments, you're going to apply this Scion's Reprieve buff to your allies that's going to increase the incoming healing that they get from all sources, including the heal. So, definitely want to make sure you have 2 instruments up before you use the skill to get pretty good value. And then we can move to the elite skill, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard about already. This is the tale of the August Queen, based around Queen Jenna's protection of, divinity's reach in the living world. And its effects it's going to give Distortion and Chaos Aura to allies. And Distortion Share to allies has a storied history in our game, and we are aware of its potential. But we also think that Distortion Share is probably a peak power fantasy for support Mesmer. And we definitely wanted to try it again in a spec that's focused around it. And we're hoping that putting it on an elite skill, where it has an adjustable duration, adjustable cooldown, and some additional effects we can also weigh against its power, will leave it in a state that it is, possible to be in our game. We definitely don't want this to be how it is before, where it's very oppressive, but we do think that, trying it out and giving it an opportunity to be in the game and kind of elevate support Mesmer and what it's doing is just pretty interesting to us. So,
how likely do you think it will continue to give AoE distortion by launch?
We will see in the beta. Maybe it does the classic, goes to blur and then blur is too strong, but this is all, betas are meant for testing, and again, this is something that we really want to do the super cool thing, and so we're going to try the super cool thing, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out.
I think there's definitely going to be a lot of things like that we'll see throughout a lot of these elite specializations, where there are, I guess, some aggressive ideas or some very wild ideas, you might say, and not all of them are going to work, but we think that's what betas are for, trying out cool stuff. And sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't, and we're going to fix the things that don't work. So if AoE distortion on the elite skill here is going to break the game, it will likely go away.
Yep. And we can also see that it has a performance bonus of its own that's also, I think, pretty strong. When you use this skill, you're going to bring up all your instruments for a duration. Baseline pretty short, just 3 seconds, but that duration is going to scale based on how many instruments you had before. So if you use it when you have no instruments up, they'll all come up for 3 seconds, but say you had 2 instruments up and then you use it, they'll all come up for 9 seconds. So giving you value when you use it, even if you had a lot of instruments up. This is another way to use it to get a quick crescendo, get all your instruments up for, those buffs that they give, to kind of also balance out that, distortion can be powerful, but this can also be another powerful effect that you can use for a different reason.
Perfect for me, who just wants to press all my shatters and then press the elite, get maximum duration.
So those cover all the utilities, so we can now move into the traits, and I'm sure everyone's just so excited to see.
All right, and I'll do one last hover over of everything before we swap to the next spec, so I'll let you guys know when to get your print screen buttons ready for all those screenshots if you haven't been keeping up already. Let's put some random traits on so it doesn't do the flashing thing that everyone really loved the last time we did elite spec previews. All right, where should we start? Minor traits?
Yep, minor traits. So I mean, the very first one is just going to be the basic minor trait that just gives you access to everything, doesn't really do anything, as it just explains what the Troubadour wants to do. But then we can move to the master minor, which is going to be harmonize. This is going to be pretty simple. You're kind of already saw it in the tooltip. It's going to cause your instruments to give increased outgoing damage and healing. It's going to be the first kind of minor bonus for just having those instruments up. You just get stronger. Then we can move to the Grandmaster minor, symphonic resonance. This, again, you saw from a tooltip. Crescendo grants affected allies boons per instrument playing. So this can, again, scale the Might and Fury based on how many instruments, kind of just playing into what you want to do with Crescendo. Then both the Adept and the Master tier kind of have themes to them. They're going to have 2 instrument traits and then 1 kind of generic value trait. So we can see that if we go into the Adept tier. The first one is going to be Mayhem. Your flute, all the instrument traits will have 2 effects. The first one will kind of augment what the initial effect when you play the instrument does, and then another one will give you an additional bonus for having that instrument playing behind you. So we see Mayhem, and it causes your flute to additionally apply Torment, make that condition burst just a bit better, and then while the flute is playing behind yourself, you'll heal yourself when you apply Condition or Torment. This trait is aimed more towards like open world gameplay, if you want to be more of a condition duelist in competitive modes, just giving you a bit more sustain and damage for playing a more condition, Torment, Confusion Bard. Or then we get into the middle trait, where we have Hold the Note. Crescendo extends the duration of boons to nearby allies. Boon extension is another core Mesmer fantasy that we have before on Signet of Inspiration, but now we're having it on this trait where you have to choose between some of the other effects. Again, powerful, making Crescendo even more powerful. I would say these specs did have in development names that, even as developers, we have to work to say the correct terms. And we get to the bottom trait where we have Syncopate. This is going to be the drum trait. When you play the drum after a delay, it'll release a quick wave where you'll also do a shorter daze, just additional CC on top of your skill. And give you a passive that when the drum is playing, you'll deal additional damage to enemies you disable. And so this is kind of an effect that we see on traits like Bunker Down or Lightning Rod from other from other specializations in the game. This, Mesmer has no shortage of CC skills, so just gives them some extra value here. So this can be a DPS trait or also just generic support trait for more CC. Moving on to the Master tier, we have the first one is the loot trait, Shredding. This augment more damage. It'll cause your loot to deal more damage per wave. So the first wave will deal normal damage, second wave will deal 25% more damage, and then the last wave will deal 50% more damage. So making sure you really want to hit those, especially at the later ones that come out. And as well as a passive, it's just going to give you a pretty good big damage increase while the loot is playing. So this will be a DPS spec. We'll want this trait compared to the others in this tier. It's going to be pretty important to keep your loot playing as it's a pretty big damage modifier. Then we can move to Raconteur. This is, again, the generic trait. It's going to be, the trait that affects your elite specs utilities. This one will augment the tails. When you use a tail, it'll grant you a note and then also recharge the corresponding instrument. So like if you use the Amora, it'll recharge the lute. If you use the Dougal one, it'll recharge the drum. And it'll also give you a lesser recharge for the heal and elite. Since they don't have a really specific instrument, it's going to recharge all of them, but just for a lesser amount. Then lastly, we can move on to Love Song. This trait is going to affect the harp. Kind of did what you saw before where it causes the harp to get you distortion. So, the Troubadour doesn't have distortion baseline, but this trait is kind of an option for the more supportive builds that want it to kind of price into it a little. And then PvE, this is also where you're going to be applying some alacrity and regen in all game mode, or regen in all game modes. PvE will also give alacrity, kind of getting those important boons out while also getting some sustained healing with your harp. Then we can move on to the Grandmaster traits.
You want to start in the middle, though, the Grandmasters, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So the first one, this is call and response, we already talked about in the blog post. When you use an instrument at the note threshold, you're going to create an after image that will play the same instrument after a delay. After image here basically means phantasm that's not a phantasm. It'll appear in the world, but it won't be targetable, and it won't give you a note when it goes away. We didn't want you to get a free note when you're already requiring notes for this. So that's why we kind of created this new type of illusion. But as you can see with what Cal's doing, as you get those notes and you play the lute, it'll spawn and then play the lute again. So it can double the CC from your drum. It can double the healing from your harp. It can also, just get you more damage. So pretty versatile trait. We can move on to the bottom trait, Altered Chord. This trait's going to focus around Crescendo. It's going to have 2 effects. The first one is just whenever you use an instrument, it's going to reduce the cooldown of Crescendo a bit. And then it's going to have an additional effect that cares about the instrument you played right before you press crescendo. So crescendo's effects are going to be augmented based on the instrument you played last. So kind of the gameplay around this trait is you want to be using your instruments as much as possible to get more crescendos out, but it also wants you to make sure that you know when you're about to crescendo so you can keep an instrument to get the right bonus. Again, giving you kind of varied utility from this. You can get more healing, more CC, just depends on how you want to play. And lastly, we can go to the top Grandmaster, which is Fortissimo. This one's kind of going to try and alter how you use crescendo in general. The first effect it has is going to give you an attribute bonus for having your instruments up, and this stacks. So if you have 2 instruments, it'll be 10%. If you have all 4, 20%. That's a pretty big number, and it's going to cause crescendo when you use it to get you a note per second for a duration. So right now it'll give you 6 notes pretty rapidly. So instead of, normally you want to use crescendo as your finisher, you want to use it as your opener here. So you're going to crescendo, then it's going to give you a lot of notes. You're going to get your instruments. So this gives you a lot of note generation, so you can have, have the possibility of having 3 or 4 instruments up for a high duration to get value out of that attribute increase.
Definitely set up the elite pretty well as well.
Yes. I think that covers it for the traits. I mentioned before talking about, Troubadour and Chronomancer, fitting them into supports, but kind of readjusting where things live. I think while we're doing traits can show off like an example of that is Bountiful Disillusionment. Before, stability was put on the distortion slot, and it was pretty powerful, especially with Chronomancer's ability to double that and things being instant cast. So we're shifting around the bonuses back a little, putting regen back on that F4 slot and changing the F5 slot to be stability, to kind of give Troubadour better access to that and have specific things that the Troubadour can be better at than Chronomancer, and in turn, hopefully going back in Chronomancer and strengthening up its identity that we had to, take a bit. We had to remove a bit of it when we added support things because it was just very powerful, especially with C-Split. So the goal is that we can put more things in Troubadour's kit so that Chronomancer can be what it wants to be again.
And the goal
again,
is that Chrono will still be viable as a support build, right?
Yes, very
it
much so.
Won't be able to do all the things that it is able to do.
Yeah. That kind of covers it for the
anything
overview.
Else?
I think hover over all those traits, make sure people got screenshots.
Get ready for your screenshots. We'll do all the traits, and then all the skills. Surely Taylor will fill the air as I hover over these things with his new and improved microphone.
No, I just need more water.
Probably need more water.
Yep.
What's your favorite skill on this profession?
I think my favorite part of the profession is definitely crescendo. I really like the warm-up, the spotlight effect. I think the VFX team was they did a really good job on that, highlight that even more. First thought, I just couldn't stop using the skill. But I think all the instruments, kind of the concept of being, a one-person band, you're a Mesmer taking your illusions to have all your instruments playing behind you instead of leading other people, so you can be your own concert and be your own be your own conductor. That's kind of the initial idea that went behind all of these skills.
You're almost done. Could probably go way faster. The chat is all on top of these screenshots.
Yeah.
Just give them 1 pixel and go back in the pod. Earn the Valiant Marshal. What's the last one?
And again, I'm going to plug the book Ghosts of Ascalon, Dougal Keane. If you don't know who that is, very good book release. I have my own copy. Cal has his own copy. Because we're just such lore heads.
Taylor's definitely more of a lore head than I am, but do my best. All right, I think that's everything. So we can move on